Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. This time we are going to be talking about pro wrestling on the NES. Pro wrestling is the best wrestling game on the NES. It has the best roster of characters, and in many ways, it's ahead of the other wrestling games. This game isn't saddled with some licensed property like the WWF or WCW, so it could be its own thing. And the gameplay really reflects that. The game has a single-player campaign, which is more of a campaign than something like the WWF WrestleMania was. And then there's the two-player mode, which is fine for what it is, but I would have liked to have seen more from it. The roster of characters is really something else. You can play as a few different people. They range from being somewhat believable, kind of the more WCW wrestlers, to being kind of goofy and a little bit more like a WWF wrestler from the era. Any one of these characters could have seamlessly fit into either WCW or the WWF from the late 80s and early 90s. And honestly, you could have slid Doink the Clown or Ric Flair into this, and you would not have missed a beat. They would have fit perfectly into this roster of wrestlers. So in pro wrestling, you have Fighter Hayabusa from Japan, Giant Panther from the US, King Korn Karn from Korea, who is my least favorite character. He's just generally awful. King Slender from the US, Starman from Mexico, who is my favorite character in this game, and the Amazon from Parts Unknown. I'm guessing he's the Ultimate Warrior's neighbor there, so don't give him a microphone and ask him to talk about anything, because that's going to go sideways in a hurry. There is one more character here, and you need to reach him, in order to reach him, you need to go through the unification match. So, you play the first section of the game, where you have to win 5 matches, and then you can play for the Video Wrestling Association Championship. And in order to get that, you beat either King Slender or you beat Giant Panther, depending on who you chose as a character. Then you get to the second round, and you need to win 10 matches, so you need to defeat each character twice, and then you face the big boss, who is Great Puma. So in order to beat the game, you need to win 15 matches. Or at least to get to the end boss, you need to win 15 matches. Great Puma is supposed to be one of the harder bosses in any NES game, so think something like Mike Tyson, because I've never been good enough to get to him in the few years I've been playing this. The two-player mode is, again, a little bit disappointing. You basically just play a one-on-one match, and it's a 2 out of 3 falls with no time limit. So it's fine for what it is, but you would have liked to have seen more. There are no tag team matches in this, and there are no stipulation matches, so no cage match or hardcore brawl or anything like that. So it's just kind of a standard one-on-one wrestling game. I really like the graphics in this game. It is bright, colorful. You've got a crowd there for you, so people are actually watching you wrestle. You're not in a black void of nothingness. You've got the referee, so you can actually see who's counting the pinfall. And there's even a cameraman there taping this whole mess, just to really let you know, hey, this is probably a TV production in some weird video game world. There are no palette swaps in this game either, so you can't select the same character in the two-player mode. For example, you can't have the Amazon face the Amazon, because they would look the exact same and it would be kind of hard to tell who's controlling which character. I think this is kind of a bad thing, because I would have liked to have seen some alternate costumes, but, limitations had to be established in some way. All of the animations are really well done. There are a ton of moves that you can do in this game. Each character has their own special move, they have their own list of moves that they can do, and also there are some common moves, but everything's animated really well, so it all looks right, or at least looks as right as the NES could do. The only other bad thing I could really say about the way the visuals look in this would be when you win, and then it has the ring kind of flash a little bit. That doesn't really... It didn't bother me when I was a kid, but now as I've gotten older, it kind of bugs me a little bit, because it does create a little strobe effect, and it would be nice if that just wasn't there, because I don't think it's really needed all that much. But hey, they wanted to do something to let you know you won, because just counting to 3 and ringing a bell wouldn't work out, I guess. I wasn't too sure where to put this, so I'll throw it in with the graphics. When you win, this is the game that would say a winner is you. It's kind of a funny thing to look at, and it's really just harkens back to a time when companies didn't really care too much about translating their game into English. It was usually just given to somebody who kind of knew the English language. Maybe they took a few classes in college and were like, yeah, I can probably do this. And then there was just no editor looking at it to make sure it's worked out right. And Nintendo of America didn't care either, for whatever reason. So we're left with a wonderful meme of a winner is you. It's not the best one, but it's a pretty fun one. So there is no story mode or narrative to pro wrestling. That's not really a bad thing here, because it forces you to kind of use your own imagination. You can come up with different rivalries and everything while you're playing this. It's almost like they gave some kid a blank slate and just said, you know what, figure it out on your own. I kind of like that, and I think it works well for a game like this. After all, this is still the arcade era, so they wanted to bring the arcade experience to the home console. That meant stories didn't really matter too much in games back in the arcade, so they wouldn't really matter too much on the home console all that much. And that means we have gems like this, where you have something that you would imagine would have kind of a flow or a narrative to it, where you have to win 5 matches, then you have to win another 10, and then you can fight the big boss at the end. You would expect there to be some kind of a reason or a motivation for your character, aside from just, winning championships. That's not here, but that means that you can create it on your own. And I like that sort of thing. It kind of gave me the motivation for, the Amazon stole the belt from Starman, so now he needs to work his way through Amazon's faction in order to get to him. Or to steal stuff from the Attitude Era. Giant Panther stole Starman's girl, and now Starman's out for revenge, or something like that. It's just kind of a cool way to think of certain things. Or they want to beat up King Corn Karn because he just sucks. And they're like, this guy does not need to be in this game. Let's just beat the crap out of him and get rid of him. Any story would really work. It's all up to you on how you want to play this game. And that's kind of the fun part with something like this. It also lets you come up with your own fake championship and challenge your friends, because It's not in the game, but I could definitely see people doing that. There's not too much to dislike about this game. The roster of characters is awesome. I really love those guys. I like the fact that all of the moves are pretty easy to pull off. I like that everyone has their own kind of unique feel to them. They've got their own specific moves that they can pull off. They have their own finishers. And it feels like it could have been a wrestling association somewhere. The roster's not very big, though, and that was probably just due to the limitations of the NES cartridge at the time, and also the Famicom cartridge as well. They probably just couldn't get more data onto this. But you've got a roster of pretty fun characters, and you do have that boss character that you can get to, which I wish had been a playable character, or at least unlockable. If this was a more modern game, I could definitely see that happening. Like, if somebody had remastered this, they might add a few more characters to it and make the bosses as playable characters once you beat the game. There would also be a more fleshed out story, I would imagine, again, if this was remastered. I also like that this game helped to spawn the Fire Pro Wrestling games. It's amazing that the guy that programmed this would go on to make Fire Pro, and Fire Pro's a really great series of wrestling games. Of the few that I've played, I really enjoyed them, and I think they just work a whole hell of a lot better than at least most of the other wrestling games from the 80s and 90s, up until you get to the ones that I think it's Ukes made. I could be pronouncing the name of their company wrong, but once you get to like the N64, I think they made some really great ones. And then you get into some of the more modern ones that I haven't tried too much yet. So everything like 2000 and onward, I haven't had a chance to really get into. But yeah, there's not a lot to dislike about pro wrestling. Any dislike I have or criticism is mostly just because of the time that this came out, and because I just wanted more from this game, and that wasn't necessarily possible at the time. Pro wrestling is one of the many video games that I wish I had when I was a kid. I wish I had a chance to play this back when I was like 5 or 6. It was miles ahead of WWF WrestleMania, and I think my friends and I probably would have enjoyed this a lot more. We like WWF WrestleMania, but I feel like this one would have been so much more fun to play. It just looked more like a pro wrestling TV show than the other games, and it did a better job of letting the player build their own story for the game. And its roster was much better, the moves and everything were much better. Just top to bottom, it's a considerably better game than WrestleMania was. While pro wrestling is a well-known game today, or at least known in the retro game scene, there was a time when you had to know someone who knew about games like this. Some people tend to forget about this now, and now that we have the internet and everything, and information about any game is just a Google search away. Not everyone had a subscription to Nintendo Power. I know that's contrary to what many people say, but no, not everyone was subscribed to Nintendo Power back in the late 80s and early 90s. So not everyone knew about all the games that were coming out for the NES or Super NES and so on and so forth. Pro wrestling would have been a hidden gem for me when I was collecting retro games in the 90s. I hadn't heard anything about it before, and yeah, there really wasn't a way for me to learn about it back then. Now that I know about it, I know that it's just a spectacular game. Anyway, guys, let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.